Hello again, my name's Wade, aka the Past Caring Coach, and I'm a Masters Powerlifter who has represented England, an International Powerlifting Federation Level 2 Coach, a Level 3 PT and an IPF referee. This is the third video in a series about the first powerlifting competition day experience. In this video I'm going to cover eating and drinking strategies for your first powerlifting competition. It is important to note that this video is not intended to cover the finer points of weight management and weight cutting to make a lower weight class. That's a completely separate video. Now, cutting weight for competition is not something you should be doing at your first meet because of the stresses that it will add to your build-up. Cutting weight for competition is an art, and even the best lifters and coaches can get it wrong. If you do it badly, at worst you can endanger your health, which is why it isn't something to be taken lightly, and even if you don't make yourself ill, you may go through months of training and the misery of the cut and still end up failing to make the intended weight. So there can be serious consequences if you get that cut wrong. Even if you manage to make weight, you may go too far and lose too much weight. Alternatively, you might make weight but then fail to refuel and rehydrate effectively after weigh-in and end up feeling awful and performing badly. So I want to strongly emphasise what I said in the first video of this series. If it is your first competition, under no circumstances should you attempt to cut weight. The mental stress of a first competition alone will be hard enough for some people to deal with. And that's without worrying about having to make weight. So first time out, don't go down the weight cutting route. Simply get to a weight that puts you comfortably within a particular weight class. Now, the IPF classes are shown on the screen now, but bear in mind that if you aren't an IPF lifter, other federations have different weight classes and you'll need to enter one of those weight classes in your particular federation. Enter a competition in the appropriate weight class and come in on competition day comfortably in that weight class. Make sure you are weighing yourself regularly leading into competition and use a reliable set of scales. Be aware that the weight you see on calibrated competition scales on meet day when compared to the average bathroom scales may vary by as much as 2 or 3 kilos. So what and when to eat and drink on competition day? Even if you aren't cutting weight and you're competing at your normal everyday walking weight, you'll definitely need to eat and drink something before and during the competition to keep you hydrated and fueled for what will be a long and energy-sapping day. Yes, it is only 9 lifts plus a few warm-ups, but the intention is to move more weight than you've done in training, and you'll be performing the big 3 lifts on the same day, which some of you may not have done in training. I train exceptionally hard, but it takes a week for me to recover from a competition, and the day after my last meet I woke up feeling like I had been hit by a truck. So it's all about physical and mental effort interwoven with a series of adrenaline peaks and troughs that makes the day extremely fatiguing. If it's a hot day as well, that will make it even tougher, so your eating and hydration strategy will be very, very important. If you're pushing for the best outcome, competition will be and should be harder than any training session. So you'll need to fuel and hydrate a little bit differently to your normal training because a competition day simply will not resemble a typical training day. As much as it would be great to offer a one-size-fits-all approach and tell you all to eat X grams of a specific food at a particular time, before and during the meet, and to give specifics about what to drink and when, I simply can't. We're all different in our responses to food and drink, and the only way to truly determine the best approach for you is for you to compete a few times, experiment with eating and drinking different things at different times and in different quantities, and to determine what works best. The obvious problem is that a competition cannot be replicated in training, unless of course you have 6 or 7 hours to mimic a competition, you have a home gym to do it in and the patience to work out a perfect strategy. So before we consider what we should eat and drink in competition, we'll start by looking at what we eat and drink in training, because this will inform the best approach on meet day. Now, everyone is different in their approach to eating and training. Personally, I won't train until about 90 minutes after I've had a meal, and I won't eat during a training session. I also tend not to drink much during training sessions unless it's a really hot day, even though I know that I probably should do. I really hate the idea of getting stomach cramps, feeling bloated, or worse still, feeling sick or even being sick during training. The problem with this approach is that if you leave too big a gap between eating and starting to train, you can very likely run out of energy at the end of your training session. And in a competition, you'll definitely have to eat something during the competition, simply because it's a long day and your strength will take a dive if you don't. Some people prefer to eat and drink about 30 minutes before training, eating a small snack. Some take a pre-workout and some sip on protein, carbohydrate and/or electrolyte drinks before and/or during a session. This is great because you're constantly fueling the system, but you need to be sure that your internals can handle that. And this is where you need to use a few training sessions to figure out exactly what works for you. A one-size-fits-all prescription can't be given even for training, because the response to food and drink will depend on what you normally eat and what you as an individual can tolerate. You wouldn't expect two lifters who may be different weights and heights to have the same responses to food and drink. When you start to train, after a while you'll develop a routine of training at probably at the same time or a particular time of day, and you'll find things to eat that agree with your digestive system and that will allow you to consistently produce a good performance in training. But everyone's normal pre-training eating regimes will differ simply because everyone's metabolism differs. Your metabolism is basically how your body takes in foods and liquids and chemically converts them by digesting them in the stomach to create usable sources of fuel to sustain your everyday functions, including exercise. As we all digest and process foods and drink at different speeds and with different effectiveness, and how the body behaves can vary from day to day, this means our ability to digest food and liquid close to training will also vary. Our taste and tolerances for particular foods will also enter the equation. Add into the mix the fact that some lifters may follow a particular diet, carnivore, vegetarian, paleo, vegan, etc., and the fact that at any given time we may be cutting, maintaining or gaining weight and taking in a different number of calories, you'll see why it isn't possible to give an absolute guide for everyone or to make detailed recommendations about the food and drink volumes and the timing that you should be eating and drinking on competition day. Through a process of experimentation, it's pretty easy to build an effective routine when you're training at the same time of day and where you're able to work out at a regular gym in a consistent fashion. In competition, however, you may have to travel, you probably have to stay overnight in a hotel, and you may struggle to get hold of the things that you normally eat. You'll also have no control over the time that you lift. So it really is hard to establish a routine that you can take from training into competition. Unfortunately, you won't be notified about flight times until after competition entries close. This will typically be about 3 to 4 weeks out from competition day. What this means is that if you normally train in the morning and you get presented with an afternoon flight or vice versa, that's going to mess with your routine. Yes, you can change your training times as soon as you find out the flight times and align them with the competition time, which is a sensible approach. But unfortunately, that isn't going to give you long to acclimatise. And if you are unable to train at the times that align with the start of your flight, this may also make things difficult, given that we aren't all at our best at particular times of the day. If you are serious, the only way to really prepare for this is to train at various times of the day during your preparation weeks. When doing this, you attempt to find eating and drinking strategies that work for training at each of these different times of day. This way, the only concern will be what to eat and drink during the competition. Occasionally you'll be forced to train at different times of day for whatever reason, and it pays to use these sessions to find an approach that works to best fuel the workouts and to make a note of the approaches that produce the best outcomes in training. This will help you to determine strategies for flights when they are at different times of the day. I normally train around 5 p.m, but as a competition approaches, I'll use the weekends to train earlier, and at some point I'll even train around midday to see what works best and how I feel. Now, part of your strategy should be to try and find the ideal foods to eat the day before as well as on competition day. I competed as a marathon and half marathon runner when I was a lot younger, and I quickly learned that certain foods eaten the day before a race will sit more easily on the stomach than others. It's pretty obvious that having a late night, drinking a load of alcohol and eating spicy foods might not be a great idea if you want to optimise your performance the following day. I was on the platform at 9 a.m. following a 7 a.m. weigh-in at last year's Commonwealth Championships in South Africa. My normal training time is 5 p.m. I started at 11 a.m. at this year's British Masters and at 5 p.m. at this year's All England Championships, which were 2 weeks later. So you simply cannot predict when you'll be lifting. And even though the All England Championships were at my normal time, I was trying to stay within a weight class at that event. So I couldn't eat as I normally would for a regular training session. This all creates real issues as your meals, meal timing and hydration requirements will change depending upon your event's start time. If you normally train at 7 p.m, and you find that you have a 9 a.m. start or vice versa, that's likely to throw a huge spanner in the works where you end up wondering what to eat and drink and when. Now, these issues are further compounded by the fact that when you train in your gym, a typical session may last around 60 to 90 minutes. A typical competition can take 7 hours from the start of the weigh-in to the presentation of awards. So the environment will be alien. The lifting time may be alien, and you may find yourself having to eat and drink during the competition when you may not normally bother to eat or drink during training. So how do we tackle these issues? The key requirement going into competition and throughout competition day is to find a state where we are optimally fed and watered and able to be at our strongest without having an upset stomach or being bloated because we've eaten or drunk too much. At the same time, we don't want an empty stomach which will offer nothing to fuel our efforts and which may possibly leave us weak and potentially cause us to pass out because our blood sugar levels are too low. When we exercise, the body moves blood away from the digestive system into the muscles. This is to supply oxygen and nutrients to fuel the physical effort. And at a time of stress or exercise, the body's focus simply does not need to be on digesting food. When you are heavily stressed, as you might be during a heavy exercise session, frightened or scared, you may be sick or even soil yourself. Now, this is unpleasant, but it's an evolved fight or flight response that is as old as nature itself. Now, evacuating food that can't be digested will obviously make you lighter. And some have argued that as we've evolved, nature has figured that if you're running away from a lion or standing to fight it, trying to digest a 5-course meal at the same time isn't going to be a priority. So expelling the food in such circumstances makes evolutionary sense. Others have argued that expelling unwanted food and liquids is simply an unwanted byproduct of shifting focus from digestion to fight or flight, and that the body simply struggles to multitask. Others have suggested that the stink produced might just make your otherwise tasty body less attractive and palatable to the lion when it pictures you as its lunch. Now, who knows which version is correct, but the problem for lifters is that nausea, sickness and bloating isn't what we want. If we train, we sweat to maintain a safe operating body temperature. Nausea may result from dehydration, and if you train in high temperatures, which can cause excessive sweating, that can lead to you passing out through dehydration. When we sweat, we also lose essential salts like sodium, magnesium and potassium. And if the salt levels get out of balance, this can cause cramping or fainting. Blood carries fuel to the muscles in the form of glucose, which is a form of sugar made from the digested food that we consume. If we exercise on an empty stomach, that can lead to blood sugar levels being too low, and this again can cause nausea and even fainting. High intensity exercise alone can cause lactic acid to build up faster than your body can process it. This is known as acidosis, and this leads to a more acidic blood pH and potentially more nausea. The problem is that at the other extreme, too much liquid can cause bloating and cramps, and simple overexertion and pushing your body beyond its current fitness levels can also trigger nausea. So now we know that eating and drinking too much can be as bad as eating and drinking too little. It is a case of finding a happy medium with food and drink that will provide the most nutrients to fuel lifting. They must, however, also provide high calories for maximal energy, but low bulk to avoid bloating. They must also be light and fast digesting to be manageable for the digestive system when blood has been diverted away from the digestive system into the muscles. The body is going to have a harder job if it has to break down solids, and so liquids or foods that are already mashed or in a semi-liquid state will be easier to manage. Drip feeding these foods a little bit at a time, rather than having everything at once, will also make it easier for the body to break them down and to digest them. One thing to emphasise is that your first competition is not the place to try anything new. When I was running marathons, the mantra all runners heard was that you need to stay hydrated throughout. Great advice, but many first timers took this too far and were chugging bottles of water and isotonic drinks well before races when they hadn't used this approach in training. Needless to say, they either finished up having to walk due to stomach cramps, or worse still, ended up being sick at the side of the road. Now for runners, this isn't a good state to be in if you still have miles to run. Now lifting is a little different, but if you haven't tried pre-workouts, caffeine and smelling salts before competition, and you aren't used to training with exotic liquids and foods on board, just don't go near them. With eating and drinking on meet day, it is a case of using small portions and grazing on things that you are familiar with. In terms of meet day calories, try eating the same as normal, but look for high calorie, low bulk foods. Fast acting carbohydrates are your go-to before a meet. Go with simple, low fibre options like bananas, white bread, rice cakes, jam, and sip on sports drinks. These should be consumed about 30 to 60 minutes before the competition to provide a quick source of energy. High fat, high fibre and high protein right before exercise are going to be slower to digest, and while we need small amounts of fats and protein, pre and during competition, these are going to sit on your stomach as they take a lot longer to digest and become available as sources of energy. And this is inviting gut issues. So taking in food which cannot be rapidly used for producing bigger numbers on the platform isn't a good idea. Fast-acting carbohydrates are things like the tennis players' favourites, bananas, and you can have dried fruits such as raisins or dates or a small orange, for example. White bread, white rice, rice cakes or a small piece of bagel are fine, and you can snack on things like pretzels, crackers or gummy sweets, which will help to give you quick bursts of energy. Sports drinks, fruit juice or a small smoothie can be sipped on, and isotonic drinks like Gatorade and Lucozade Sport are okay, although I find that the fizzy stuff will give me gas and bloating, so I prefer to sip on water with a small scoop of electrolyte powder and add that throughout the competition. You can also use honey for a quick burst of energy. Food that you eat gets churned up by chewing and swallowing, and the body uses it to create the fuels that it will use to drive your workouts. Now the body converts the food that we eat into adenosine triphosphate, which it uses as its fuel for short, hard efforts. This ATP phosphocreatine system, as it's known, will fuel 9 to 10 second efforts, which is typically how long a lift will take. And the word creatine appearing in the phosphocreatine system should get you thinking about supplementation. Adding creatine in liquid or tablet form to help ATP production before exercise makes obvious sense. Now, the second system of fuel production that the body uses for longer bouts of hard effort is the glycolytic system. Glycolysis is the breakdown of the carbs we ingest into usable fuels. The carbs you eat, when digested, are supplied to the muscles in the form of sugar, glucose, and the breakdown of that glucose will produce adenosine triphosphate, ATP. Now, the ingestion of simple sugars throughout the competition will keep topping up that ATP level. What this means is that high glycemic index foods are your friend on competition day. The glycemic index, or GI, appearing on the screen now, is a ranking of carbohydrates on a scale of 0 to 100 according to the extent to which they raise blood sugar, or glucose levels, after eating them. Foods with a high GI are those which are rapidly digested, absorbed and quickly available to provide energy. They will result in marked fluctuations in blood sugar or glucose levels. Low GI carbohydrates, the ones that produce smaller fluctuations in your blood glucose and insulin levels, are one of the secrets to long-term health. They can reduce your risk of type 2 diabetes and heart disease. Now, on competition day, however, we're less concerned about this, and there's an old saying, on meat day, it's okay to eat like a 5-year-old. So stick with the high GI carbs and worry about more healthy eating afterwards. As regards drinking, you need to stay hydrated. If you feel thirsty, you're already dehydrated. Monitor the colour of your urine throughout the day. Fully hydrated, your urine should be a light straw colour. If it starts to get dark, that indicates you're dehydrated, because the darker the colour, the more it is concentrated with waste products as opposed to water. Cans of Monster will give you a caffeine kick, and caffeine's proven effective in studies for improving focus and alertness. But it might not be sensible to go downing loads of this stuff if you're using pre-workout and drinking 10 cups of espresso, as these also tend to be full of caffeine. Now, caffeine is fine in small doses, but may give you stomach upsets and leave you feeling permanently wired if you overdo it. Now, too much, and it can also produce a big drop in energy levels partway through the competition, so take care with caffeine. During a competition, I like to sip on a protein drink between lifts and nibble on bananas and fruit pastels throughout the competition. I also sip on water containing electrolyte powders between the lifts. A trick I learned as a runner is that if the liquid you take in is cold, you should swill it around in your mouth before swallowing it. Very cold liquids hitting the gut can cause stomach cramping. My approach to competition day nutrition probably involves eating less than I should, but personally I would rather feel slightly hungry than sick and bloated, and the protein drink I sip on helps by making me feel more satiated. Again, what works for me might not work for you. So at your first meet, it really is a case of don't stuff your face full of food or pour gallons of water down your neck. Simply try to survive the experience and use your first competition to learn what works for you in the future. If you've eaten before weigh-in, there's less of a concern. But if you haven't eaten, as soon as you leave the scales, get some fast-acting carbohydrates on board. Aim to get 80 to 90% of carbs in the food and drink that you take during this period. Caffeine about 30 minutes before lifting will help store carbs for energy. So if you don't take a pre-workout, you can have a tea or coffee, and if you do use a pre-workout, you could probably also have a coffee, but bear in mind the point I raised about having too much caffeine. Projectile vomiting on the centre referee isn't pleasant, and having too little caffeine is better than too much. And if you haven't tried all this stuff in training beforehand, do not go there. You'll only get 10 minutes between squats and bench presses and between bench presses and deadlifts, and so nibbling on sweets and electrolyte drinks are the safest option once the competition gets underway. Again, it is a case of small amounts and often. The takeaway from this is that you need to find out in advance how much and what you can stuff in your face before training in a 2-hour space before you hit the gym and still feel good. Try this a few AM, PM and lunchtime training sessions and record what works and what doesn't. Now the bit in between lifts is about keeping carb and fluid levels topped up without overdoing the food bulk. And you should stick to foods that you know well. Once again, I'm sorry that I can't be more specific about the best things to eat and when, but individual differences are an obvious issue. Despite this, I'm going to conclude by giving some general guidelines. Let's suppose you aren't having to refuel after a weight cut. I would suggest the following. 2 to 3 hours before your first squat, attempt to go with a balanced meal, carbs plus protein, e.g. rice, chicken, oatmeal and whey. Take creatine, 3 to 5 grams. If you take it daily, include it here. As regards hydration, start sipping water with electrolytes 1 hour before your first competition attempt. A light carb snack, banana, rice cake, a little jam if you like, or a bagel for quick energy. And then you can continue to hydrate with small sips of water. About 20 to 30 minutes before your first squat attempt, go with a pre-workout, 1 scoop of 150 to 300 milligrams of caffeine, depending on the particular product you use. But if you haven't used caffeine in training and you don't know how it affects you, don't touch it. Electrolytes again, sip with water to offset caffeine's dehydration effects. And during competition, keep doing this between lifts. For quick carbs, you can use gummy bears, fruit pastels, sports gels or a small sports drink between squat, bench and deadlift attempts. For an optional caffeine boost, if the meet runs long, you can go with a small caffeine source, half a scoop of pre-workout or coffee before deadlifts, but only if you can tolerate the stimulants well. Test this routine in training first. Never try new supplements on meet day. Stick to recommended doses and recognise that more caffeine isn't better. Also, check your federation rules for banned substances and make sure that there isn't anything untoward in your supplements. As always, if this has been useful, please do the like and subscribe thing, drop a comment, and for coaching enquiries, you can contact me at the email address appearing on the screen now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.